From his brimstone bed, at a break of day, a-walking the devil is gone, to look at his little snug farm of the world, and see how his stock went on. Over the hill and over the dale, and he went over the plain, and backward and forward he swished his tail, as a gentleman swishes a cane. How then was the devil dressed? Oh, he was in his Sunday's best. His coat was red, and his breeches were blue, and there was a hole where his tail came through. A lady drove by in her pride, in whose face an expression he spied, for which he could have kissed her, such a flourishing, fine, clever creature was she, with an eye as wicked as can be. I should take her for my aunt, thought he, if my dam had had a sister. He met a lord of high degree, no matter what was his name, whose face with his own when he came to compare, the expression, the look, and the air, and the character too, as it seemed to a hair, such a twin likeness there was in the pair, that it made the devil start and stare, for he thought there was surely a looking-glass there, but he could not see the frame. He saw a lawyer killing a viper on a dunghill beside his stable. Hoth, quoth he, thou puttest me in mind of the story of Cain and Abel. An apothecary on a white horse rode by on his vocation, and the devil thought of his old friend, death in the Revelation. He passed a cottage with a double-coach house, a cottage of gentility, and he owned with a grin that his favourite sin is pride that apes humility. He saw a pig repeatedly down a river float. The pig swam well, but at every stroke was cutting his own throat. And Satan gave thereat his tail a twirl of admiration, for he thought of his daughter war, and her suckling babe taxation. Well enough, in sooth, he liked that truth, and nothing the worse for the jest. But this was only a first thought, and in this he did not rest. Another came presently into his head, and here it proved, as has often been said, that second thoughts are best. As piggy plied with wind and tide his way with such celerity, and at every stroke the water dyed, with his own red blood the devil cried, behold a swinish nation's pride, in cotton-spun prosperity. He walked into London leisurely, the street were dirty and dim, but there he saw brothers the prophet, and brothers the prophet saw him. He entered a thriving bookseller's shop. Quoth he, we are both of one college, for I myself sate like a cormorant once upon the tree of knowledge. As he passed through Coldbath's fields, he looked at a solitary cell, and he was well pleased, for it gave him a hint for improving the prisons of hell. He saw a turnkey tie a thief's hands with a cordial tug and a jerk. Nimbly, quoth he, a man's fingers move when his heart is in his work. He saw the same turnkey unfettering a man with little expedition, and he chuckled to think of his dear slave trade, and the long debates and delays that were made concerning its abolition. He met one of his favorite daughters by an evangelical meeting, and forgetting himself for joy at her sight, he would have accosted her outright and given her a fatherly greeting. But she tipped him a wink, drew back and cried, "Avaunt, my name's religion." And then she turned to the preacher and leered like a lovesick pigeon. A fine man and a famous professor was he, as the great Alexander now may be, whose fame not yet o'erpast is, or that new Scotch performer, who is fiercer and warmer, the great Sir Arch Bombastes. With throbs and throes, and ahs and ohs, far famed his flock for frightening, and thundering with his voice, the while his eyes zigzag like lightning. This Scotch phenomenon, I trow, beats Alexander hollow. Even when most tame, he breathes more flame than 10 fire kings could swallow. Another daughter he presently met, with music of fife and drum, and a consecrated flag, shout of tag and rag, and march of rank and file, which had filed the crowded aisles of the venerable pile. From church he saw her come. He called her aside and began to chide, "For what dost thou said he. My city of Rome is thy proper home, there's work enough for thee. Thou hast confessions to listen, and bells to christen, and altars and dolls to dress, and fools to coax, and sinners to hoax, and beads and bones to bless, and great pardons to sell for those who pay well, and small ones for who pay less. Nay, father, I boast that this is my post. She answered, and thou wilt allow that the great harlot, who is clothed in scarlet, can very well spare me now. Upon her business I come here, that we may extend her powers. Whatever lets down this church that we hate is something in favor of ours. You will not think, great cosmocrat, that I spend my time in fooling. Many irons, my sire, have we in the fire, and I must leave none of them cooling. For you must know stank councils here are held which I bear rule in. When my liberal notions produce mischievous motions, there's many a man of good intent in either house of parliament, whom I shall find a tool in. And I have hopeful pupils too, who all this while are schooling. Progress they make in our liberal opinions, my utilitarians, my all sorts of Indians, and all sorts of Arians, my all sorts of ists, and my prigs and my wigs, who all have sorts of twists, trained in the very way I know. Father, you would have them go, high and low, wise and foolish, great and small, march of intellect, boys and all. Well pleased wilt thou be at no very far day, when the cauldron of mischief boils, and I bring them forth in the battle array, and bid them suspend their broils, that they may unite and fall on the prey, for which we are spreading our toils. How the nice boys all will giveth mouth at the call, hark away to the spoils. My Macs and my Quacks, and my lawless Jacks, my Shields and O'Connells, my pious MacDonalds, my Joke Smith Sidney and all of his kidney, my Humes and my Brohams, my merry old Jerry, my Lord Kings and my Dr. Doyles. At this good news, so great the devil's pleasure grew, that with a joyous swish he rent the hole where his tail came through. His countenance fell for a moment, when he felt the stitches go. Ah, thought he, there's a job now, that I've made for my tailor below. Great news, bloody news, cried the newsman. The devil said, stop, let me see. Great news, bloody news, thought the devil, the bloodier the better for me. So he bought the newspaper and no news at all for his money he had. Lying varlet, thought he, thus to take in old Nick. But it's some satisfaction, my lad, to know thou art paid beforehand for the trick, for this sixpence I gave thee is bad. Then it came into his head by oracular inspiration that what he had seen and what he had said in the course of this visitation would be published in the Morning Post for all this reading nation. Therewith in second sight he saw the place and the manner and time in which this mortal story would be put in a mortal rhyme. That it would happen when two poets should on a time be met in the town of Nether Stowey, in the shire of Somerset. There while the one was shaving, would he the song begin, and the other when he heard it at breakfast, in ready accord join in. So each would help the other, two heads being better than one, and the phrase and conceit would in unison meet, and so with glee the verse flow free, in ding-dong chime of sing-song rhyme, till the whole were merrily done. And because it was set to the razor, not to the loop or harp, therefore it was that the fancy should be bright and the wit be sharp. But then said Satan to himself, as for that said beginner, against my infernal majesty there is no greater sinner. He hath put me in ugly ballads, with libelous pictures for sale. He hath scoffed at my hoofs and my horns, and he has made very free with my tail. But this master poet shall find I am not a safe subject for whim, for I'll set up a school of my own, and my poets shall set upon him. He went to a coffee house to dine, and there he had soy in his dish, having ordered some soles for his dinner, because he was fond of flat fish. They are much to my palate, thought he, and now guess the reason who can, why no bait should be better than plaice, when I fish for a parliament man. But the soles in the bill were 10 shillings. Tell your master, quoth he, what I say. If he charges at this rate for all things, he must be in a pretty good way. But mark ye, said to the waiter, I'm a dealer myself in this line, and his business between you and me, nothing like so expensive as mine. Now soles are exceedingly cheap, which he will not attempt to deny, when I see him at my fish market, and I warrant him by and by. As he went along the Strand between 3 in the morning and 4, he observed a queer-looking person who staggered from Perry's door, and he thought that all the world over, in vain for a man you might seek, who could drink more like a Trojan, or talk more like a Greek. The devil, then he prophesied, it would one day be a matter of talk, that with wine when smitten, and with wit moreover be happily bitten, this erudite bibber was he who had written the story of this walk. A pretty mistake, quoth the devil, a pretty mistake, I opine. I have put many ill thoughts in his mouth, he will never put good ones in mine. And whoever shall say that to Porson these best of all verses belong, he is an untruth-telling whoreson, and so shall be called in the song. If seeking an illicit connection with fame, anyone else should put in a claim, in this comical competition, that excellent poem will prove a man-trap for such foolish ambition, where the silly rogue shall be caught by the leg, and exposed in a second edition. Now this morning air was cold for him, who was used to a warm abode, and yet he did not immediately wish to set out on his homeward road. For he had some morning calls to make before he went back to hell, so he thought, I'll stop into a gaming house, and that will do as well. But just before he could get to the door, a wonderful chance befell, for all in a sudden in a dark place, he came upon General's burning face, and it struck him with such consternation, that home in a hurry his way he did take, because he thought by a slight mistake 'twas the general conflagration.